In this video, I want to continue talking about capital budgeting, and we're going to introduce what I'd like to refer to, I guess, as some curveballs, some of the things that are interesting in their complications of the process of capital budgeting and making the decisions of what to buy for the company. So let's start with this basic concept, right? What are the things that are a little bit different? When making projects, of course, we have to worry about opportunity cost. If we do A, do we lose some kind of income from alternative opportunities? So in this case, we could use this warehouse space, right? But we could actually rent that out for $200,000. So if we use it for a new lab, that lost $200,000 should be incorporated into the decision making, because the $200,000 is, for all intents and purposes, a given, right? We want to think about using something else. So in this case, opportunity costs should be netted out against any other potential revenues from a new project. What about some externalities, right? What happens if we create a product that ultimately may replace or could replace a product that we already have, right? In this case, they talk about this wireless router project, right? 25% of the sales, would have been purchased using an existing Linksys router system. So if we want to create this new product, what will that do to the sales of the other product? And of course, if those sales net out one for one, then of course we shouldn't do the project, because we're not really moving forward. We're just standing still. So we have to worry about, again, what happens when we create products within our product matrix that could offset each other or displace each other. Frequently, we have these problems in consumer products where I think this is ultimately why you end up seeing new improved, right? Well, every time you turn around, something is new improved. Well, they don't create a new product, because that new product would just replace the old product, and there wouldn't be any change in sales per se. And I don't know that that's a straightforward corollary between the two, but it does make some sense that we have to worry about cannibalization, right? Are we really moving forward in revenues? If we're not, maybe we shouldn't do this project. Sunk costs. And again, this is something that is different for every company, right? I mean, one of the things as we discuss techniques in MBA programs and in undergraduate programs is that every company does things a little bit differently. We have to recognize what they are, but we also have to be able to say, well, if the company does it this way, then that's the way we'll do it. We understand that things are different. And as long as every company does things without changing their process, the decision-making aspect of making decisions won't change, right? So sunk costs are basically things that are spent before the decision is even considered to be a good decision or a bad decision. We don't want to include these in our incremental analysis, because we're going to spend this money regardless of whether we do the project or not, right? So if we have research and development, is that a sunk cost and therefore irrelevant to whether or not we should do a decision or not? Frequently we do things like maybe architectural costs, right? We have to get an architect to give us a rendition of the building before we can even create the blueprints to understand what the building is going to cost us And in the end, if we decide that's too expensive, then we've already spent that money. So again, whether we include this or not is kind of irrelevant. From a technical perspective, if the money is already spent, it should not be incorporated into the decision of to do the project or not do the project. There are some real world complexities that we got to worry about. When we predict cash flows in the future, we have to realize that whatever we decide today is based on predictions of the future. And of course, we live in an ongoing, changing world, so we need to be able to adjust for these things. Sensitivity analysis is an analysis technique that allows us to change one of the assumptions in our decision-making process. So let me see if I can explain this a little bit better with a table. So we have three potential outcomes. We have what we think is probably going to happen. In this case, 10,000. We'll sell 10,000 units. But we also believe it couldn't be any worse than 8,000, and we couldn't produce more than 12,000. So we have three different scenarios, if you will, or sensitivity analysis assumptions for units. But we also have some for price, for labor costs, for materials, for the cost of financing, right? So what we can do then is utilize these differences to calculate net present value under varying scenarios. So in this case, if you look at units, the very worst net present value that we would find with that worst case scenario is $29,000, and the best case is $216,000. And if you use the net present value averages for all of these, we find out that that really is what gives us the $122,994 is what we assume the average net present value would be. How do we utilize this a little bit further? Maybe we could use scenario analysis, where we actually are going to look at a variety of changes. What happens if we have a price reduction? Prices go down $17. That means units are going to go up to 12,000. Net present value is going to change by 108,000. If price increases to $25, units go down to 8,000, which means we're going to have $149,000. Again, these look at varying ways of adjusting, if you will, the values or the variables within our analysis. Maybe we're interested in some equivalency types of questions, right? Do we have an idea of at what price how many units we could sell? And we would like to know at what price could we make the product and then ultimately have the same or equivalent net present value. Again, how the company utilizes this is really not part of our analysis here. We just have to recognize that you can alternate or you can change the values, if you will, and see how it affects the net present value question. At the end of this, we're going to look at a spreadsheet that is going to be a more realistic kind of a view of how capital budgeting is done in real life. And we'll wait for that till the very end of this video. Some alternative questions, though, are the things about capital rationing. One of the things that we assume is that companies can get as much money as they really want. And although that is somewhat unrealistic, for a large corporation, it's very difficult to see how they might not be able to get enough money to do whatever they want to do. Most companies would not have a need to spend $3, $4, $5 billion in a year in investments for the company. It's going to be a smaller number. Now, where this becomes more realistic is for a very small company where gathering funds is a real life challenge, right? So in this case, when we talk about capital rationing, what we're talking about is a company is going to set a budget, and that budget is the maximum amount of money that is going to be used to grow the company, to either replace assets and or to buy new assets and expand in the marketplace. So let's look at a few techniques about how this might work. So here's a company, right, that has 6 projects that they're interested in doing. They've calculated the internal rate of returns for the project. We know what the project's present value, the inflows are. So again, the net present value, of course, is what? The benefit minus the cost. Here's the net present value. So we know what the benefits are and the net benefits for each one of these projects. The company has a cost of capital of 10%, and it has these projects with a constraint of $250,000. So how can we work through this choice? Which projects do we ultimately want to do? Well, there's 2 ways we can approach this issue. The first thing we can do is look and utilize the internal rate of return approach. In this case, using this capital rationing worksheet, you can enter the projects and then sort these yellow boxes based on the internal rate of return. So we go from highest to lowest. The decision then is on the right-hand side. How much money are you going to spend? If you go down here, if we do projects B, C, and E, we will spend $230,000. If we wanted to do A, which is a good project, right? The cost of capital is less than 12%. If we wanted to do this project, it would cost more than $250,000. So in this case, we would do those 3 projects and then we would stop there. If we could break this project down, if we could do only 1/4 of project A, that is spend only $20,000 and do project A but on a 25% scale, that would get us to the $250,000. But again, not knowing that without actually seeing the projects, we can't say that at this point. Another approach for this is to use the net present value approach. Does the exact same process, except this time we sort by net present value. In this case, you can see if we do project C, B, and A, we would actually spend $250,000. And of course, in this case, we would spend what? There would be 45, there would be 87, there would be $97,000 in net present value into the project. Again, E and F, again, are clearly good projects. They clearly add to the wealth of the company, but because of this constraint that we put on our cash flows and our budget, we're not going to be able to do these extra projects. So the downside is we may pass on perfectly good projects. Hopefully, we would never do bad projects if we had more money to spend, if the budget was greater than our actual analysis. So how this ultimately works for a company, here we have our 10% cost of capital. And again, if you remember, the internal rate of return process says anything with an internal rate of return greater than the cost of capital, then we would do that project. So you see here it says the B, C, E, A, F, all of these are good projects, but here's our budget constraint. So again, this is just an analysis here, or an illustration, if you will, of what happens when we put these budget constraints in the decision-making process. hopefully the company can work its way through this analysis to determine exactly what to do moving forward. Excuse me. Another issue is what happens if we have two mutually exclusive projects, but the difference between the two is really more of a quality issue, right? A cheaper device is going to have higher maintenance costs. It's probably going to have a shorter lifespan, but by definition, it's cheaper. The second device we have is a higher quality product. It's going to cost more. Maintenance cost might be less, might have a longer lifespan. So essentially, we have these two projects that are mutually exclusive, but they have unequal lives. And since net present value is the process of summing future cash flows, any project with a longer life has an advantage over a project with a shorter life. So in this case, you can see that the net present value of A is 15,000 and the net present value of B is 18,000. So on the surface, it appears that project B is better because it increases the wealth of shareholders more. There are two techniques that we can use. We can use what's referred to as a replacement chain analysis, where essentially we repeat these projects until they begin and end at the same time. We're then going to compute the net present value utilizing all of these repeated projects. So we're going to find the present value of those repeated projects and sum those all together. The equivalent annual cost method converts the net present value into an annuity-based benefit. So we look at the project and say, well, what is this project on average? What is it going to contribute per year to the company? Of course, we're going to accept those projects that provide the greatest benefit to the company. So here we have what's referred to the unequal lives worksheet. And very simply, you just enter the net present values, put in the lifespan for each project, and the discount rate. Now, if they're mutually exclusive and fairly close in time span, we may have the exact same discount rate. But for very big differences, we may need to have differences in discount rates for a very, very long project. So in this case, we'll keep them the same. The annualized net present value says that project A is going to provide about $6,000 a year in benefit, where B is going to provide $5,000. The replacement chain, now there is a little bit of an assumption here, just because of the mathematics and the way things are programmed. I have just assumed that you take 3 times 4, and that gives you the equal time span. However, that's not always necessarily true. We could get, if this was 3 and 6 were the years, then we would do project B 1 time, and we would do project A twice. But because of the ease of computation, I basically have made these things equivalent. You get the same answer, whether you do or not. You get the same A is better than B, etc. You get the same kind of answer. And again, in this case, the replacement chain says that by doing A, you would get a higher benefit, even replacing it, than if you just did replacement chain B. So again, there's a variety of questions that come across a company that are just, we need to tweak the techniques just a wee little bit. One final question that we might have is something about abandonment analysis. And in abandonment analysis, the process really looks at how do we know how long we want to do this project? right? Now, what this requires is for us to do a little bit more forecasting. We need to estimate what is the salvage value of the project. That is, what could we sell the project for at the end of each year for the lifespan of this project. From then we would calculate the capital budgeting techniques each year to find what we would refer to as an optimal lifespan, or what's better defined as the engineering lifespan. In other words, how long should this project's life be in our analysis? Now, if it's a critical project, of course, if it says you should do it 3 years, we're not going to do it 3 years and then stop. What it means is, to maximize the increase in value of the company, we should only do this project for 3 years, and then we should replace it. We should look at trying to find alternative ways of doing this project time and time again as the company and as time progresses. So in this case, as you can see here, we have, this is that project A. Here are our cash flows. And what we've done is just said, look, at the end of year 1, if we wanted to, we could sell the assets for $85,000. So we spent $100,000, we earned $50,000, and then we sold it for $85,000. The net present value for doing this project 1 year is 17%. Again, the discount rate 15%. Internal rate of returns 35, modifieds 35, profitability index 1.1. What happens if we do it 2 years? 65,000 of what we could sell the assets for in 2 years. So we spent 100,000. You made 50,000 year 1. You made 50,000 year 2. And in the end of year 2, you also received this 65,000. So again, you can see it calculates the changes in these capital budgeting techniques based on the value and the cash flows for that particular time frame of investment. The point of this analysis is we need to find out how we maximize value. And if you go across here, you can see that 4 years is actually the maximum time that we should do this project. It would provide us with the maximum net present value. Now, remember, not everything always agrees, right? It turns out that the actual modified internal rate of return is year 1, which kind of makes sense because it reinvests at that interest rate, at this interest rate of 15%. But also you can find out here, internal rate of return says really you should do this project, for 2 years. We want to maximize value. So the end number here is this 4-year project. So again, just a way of trying to figure out exactly what the time frame is of the project that we want to do. The final thing, and there is actually an entire spreadsheet of this, but if you look at this analysis, what I've provided us with is a spreadsheet that will let you vary the variables, right? Let's just look at sales. $400,000 is what we predict in sales. Price is $37.50, and this has a project life of 3 years. So how can we vary these? Well, what we want to do is create some variation, I guess, in inflation or unit growth, excuse me. So for unit growth, we say, look, we're going to grow sales by 2% per year in units. We have a standard deviation of about 2%. So what this will do is it will vary the growth per unit. So every year it's 2%, and then we're going to incorporate this growth rate. 2% is the average, 2% standard deviation, and it will plug this in across the line. So we'll have varying amounts of sales every year based on our production and our estimated growth rates. We can do it for price inflation as well. We can do it for almost anything. And there is a video coming up that does this and looks at this entire comprehensive analysis question, so we can see how we can make these decisions and get a flavor of how complicated the prediction process is. I know this is a pretty long video, but we'll see you in the next one.